is 85% of big data projects fail. The companies that I mentor achieve a 90% success rate.
In a very similar way, I think we're going to have AI native, generative AI native, or AI native companies where their processes are already set up to be fast and to accept the AI improvements. The question I have in my mind is, so how much does that improve their productivity? Maybe they just went to a conference and they've been loaded up with everything should be LLMs, and they need somebody in the room who's technical enough to say, no, that's stupid.
You are the manager of the Big Data Institute, and I want to poke you a bit around this. Do you think the future is more data or less data for AI? So are we going into Big Data Institute, or should we pivot in a few years into Small Data Institute? Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the NILG.AI podcast. Today we have with us Jesse Anderson, the managing director at the Big Data Institute and author of the Data Teams book, A Unified Management Model for Successful Data-Focused Teams. This episode is sponsored and co-sponsored by Data Science Portuguese Association and the DSPA Insights that will be held in Lisbon in September. We were together, Jesse and myself, speaking at the latest edition in Porto last month in May. So thank you, Jesse, for being here. It's an honor to host you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. So let me start with a quote from your LinkedIn profile that I love because I use it a lot as our first slide on all our sales deck, just to align leads on what to expect and to set the expectations right, which is 85% of big data projects fail. The companies that I mentor achieve a 90% success rate. These companies succeed not by focusing on the technology, though technology is important. And actually, my talk on the SPA Insight had a lot about that, but by making sure the data team has all the crucial skills necessary to bring one of these projects successfully into production. So, what do you think is the main reason that big data projects fail?
Well, they often fail for several different reasons. Sometimes it's organizational, sometimes it's technical, but usually it's a mix of both. And that's usually what really throws people off is there's this problem, this problem, this problem, all contributing, and they think that maybe they solve one problem. We don't have data scientists. Go hire data scientists. That was just one part of the problem. Maybe it was an important part at that point, but it wasn't the solution, the overall solution. So this multi-factor problem really creates difficulties for teams and managers. But from my opinion, for the organizational side, usually it's a mix of not having the right ratios. We'll talk more about that in a second. But the bigger one, I think, is that the upper level management either hasn't bought in or thinks this is easy for some reason. We're seeing this right now quite a bit with generative AI, where you think, oh, generative AI, I can just type something in and get a response. And that means that all these lazy data engineers, data scientists should be able to type something in and get something out. So we've had this massive mismatch of expectations created by generative AI, and it's not doing us any favors. Whereas you rightly pointed out, this has been a problem from the beginning. Now it's just massively exacerbated by generative AI.
Yeah, I feel like a few years ago, like people weren't expecting AI to be like a continuous improvement process, but once you explain that to them, they catch that it was a continuous improvement process. It was not something that you just plug and play and it's working. But now this feeling of AI being like completely transactional, like I can write something on ChatGPT and it gives me like the right response. So building an AI project is just typing a prompt and it will uh, completely transform my company and 10x my results has been fully exacerbated. And I feel like now most companies have like a fully transactional view on AI. And if we think, let's talk, for example, about CRM platforms like HubSpot, Salesforce, etc. Like it's something like very transactional, right? So it's something like you just have to log in, pay for a subscription, and it should work. But most of the reasons why even that type of classical software, like, it's just a CRM platform, doesn't solve the problems, it's not because of the technical issues, it's because of the adoption issues, it's because the processes are not adjusted to the platform. So something I see in software in general, but even more on AI, is this organizational issue around how we see how we observe the area, how we understand the area, and what we do day by day to improve on that direction, more than on buying the right piece of technology or on building the right piece of technology. So we see people, we see skills, we see human factors, and I think your book, Data Teams, with an emphasis on teams, actually reinforces this notion of it's more about the human factor, right? When we want to succeed on AI projects. Do you think that will be the right way to frame it?
I think it will be. If you remember, we had or hopefully you can link the talk that I gave because that was put up on YouTube.
Yeah,
But I talked a little bit about what's causing, for example, in the generative AI, what's going to be the bottleneck there. And so I kind of divided the talk in half, and the bottleneck that I talked about was not it's not going to be that you can't type a prompt in. It's that your processes and that you as a manager, you as a CEO, you as a board level person are going to hamper that in some fashion. That although you're going to have this thing that can do lots of things, your processes, your organization, you're just going to shift the bottleneck. So you and I being engineers, we understand that yes, there's a bottleneck here. And let's say it's in code generation, code writing, something like that, but oftentimes that bottleneck is just a little bit less than the next problem, which is probably your organizational processes. The feedback loop from your users is just the next problem above that. And you're just going to shift that, or that you're going to put a bunch of security problems in place. So
yeah,
as we look at problems, these problems just show organizational problems, process problems that are often pointed to as technical problems. It's the data team. We need a dashboard. That dashboard didn't work, but usually right at the foundation is some sort of organizational process problem, communication problem that we're kind of glossing over.
yeah. It makes sense. I don't know if you were on the second day of the conference, but on the second day I presented our AI canvas, and one of the blocks of the AI canvas that I typically talk about the consequences on the rest of the organization by embracing an AI project is a lot about elasticity. So if I remove this bottleneck here, will the rest of the organization be able to adjust to the new version or to the new throughput of my process or to the new capacity? And quite often, people do not prepare for that. So let's say we are working on e-commerce and we are building a recommender systems. The recommender system increases sales, but then they don't increase purchases, right? So they start getting out of stock. So plenty of times, like these solutions fail because they are looking at it into a very narrow space. And actually, this book here, Power and Prediction, uh, talks a lot about how we are embracing AI now, which is like a point application. Like we are just replacing one decision made by a human or made by the hard rule into a prediction based decision, but we are not thinking about the rest. And the actual impact of AI will be when we rethink processes from scratch. So instead of being replacing a decision with AI, it will be how can I redefine this process, knowing that now I have AI, knowing that now I have data assets as a whole. For example, I recommend you this book, Power and Prediction. Is quite good around that.
There was a part that I forgot to talk about in that talk, and that was I think that there's going to be AI native companies in a very different way that AI companies that are being founded right now will be native to that. If people are thinking about this and perhaps having a difficult time understanding it, you know how there's cloud native companies, and those cloud native companies from the very beginning of their startup were on the cloud. There was no, hey, we need to go backport this, we need to go change this so it works on the cloud. It went directly to cloud. But if you have a company that was founded, let's say 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they may have done something on prem and they're trying to move over. In a very similar way, I think we're going to have AI native, generative AI native, or AI native companies where they're the processes are already set up to be fast and to accept the AI improvements. Where the question I have in my mind is, so how much does that improve their productivity? Is it a 10% improvement? Is it 100%? Is it a 200% improvement? And to the point where I wonder, that the question for me is, will a company who is not AI native or generative AI native, will they ever be able to catch back up? Or will it be fast enough where that startup could catch up in a much shorter time than previous startups? If you look back at previous startups, it would take them, let's say, 5 years to generate that code base, to create that code base. Will that be a 1 year start? Uh, so will that be a 1 year time frame? So now this protective moat that businesses think they have is significantly smaller because a smaller startup can actually generate this moat now.
Makes sense. Actually, we have seen this with previous technologies like electricity, like computers, the internet. So whenever we have a disruptive technology, you have companies, especially large corporations, that try to adjust. They are so they lost so much plasticity because of all the inherent processes of a scale that they cannot adjust fast, and then they are replaced by new incumbents that are native on that technology that cause the disruption. And I agree with you around maybe in 10, 20 years from now, once people really understands the impact of AI, will create, and maybe 10, 20 years is too much, but at some point they will start appearing AI native companies where the way they solve the problems is considering AI from scratch and not just AI as a replacement for a given process. Regarding this question of who will win, if it is an AI native or a company that adjusts, I believe it will depend on what is the top bottleneck. Is it access to data or is it the actual process? Because if access to data is the key bottleneck, then the largest companies will have by definition the largest amount of data, and they will be able to produce better models. But if it is the process, and I believe it will be about the process, because with Gen AI, I believe we need less and less data because of foundational models. um, that those that truly adjust the process, at least at that 10x, will completely outpace their competitors, regardless of how large their competitors are. But that's my intuition
Well, that is a
initially.
good way to frame the problem. That is a good way to frame that problem, because yes, a company that doesn't have enough data, uh, Google's a great example. When we create Google could have created those initial voice models because they had the most amount of voice data. They created Google Voice in order to be able to train on that. Nobody could keep up with that. But now you have other models out there, and as you pointed out, foundational models. I don't need to go to Google anymore. I could use Whisper. I could use any number. Will the same thing happen? We're seeing this with Llama 3 giving some pretty good models where we don't have to go to OpenAI, or we have Gemini. The competition is pretty fierce. Quite honestly, a year and a half ago when they were first coming out, I thought it was a winner take all. Winner take all meaning I thought OpenAI was just going to run away with it and we'd have this monopoly. But what's happened, and I'm surprised, is we have even more competition, and that even more competition is actually really good for us because one, it creates better models. Two, it put open source models out there. But three, it pushed down the price. OpenAI probably wouldn't have been pushing down its price if it wasn't trying to compete with Google and Llama and everything else.
Yeah, especially Yama. That's a very good point. I think whenever we see a new technology, and I'm myself guilty of charge, we tend to think that it's going to be a winner takes all, and then human nature surprises us, and I guess free market surprises us, and a new incumbent appears, whether it is a different company, whether it is open source communities following up with this. So you were talking about price, you were talking about quality of the models, and it's incredible how each iteration of model is, it seems like uh, there will be a new winner takes all, whether it is from GPT-3 to 4 or DALI or whatever new version. It seems like it's like an order of magnitude ahead. But I don't know, 1 to 3 weeks after that release, you see a new solution that maybe doesn't beat the previous one in the whole spectrum of tasks or in the whole spectrum of features, price, latency, etc. But it is a good competitor at some of the edges, and that's the truth for video, audio, text, and whatever. I'm curious to see what is going to happen with video, with Sora and all of these competitors, especially with video versus image. So, what is going to be the trade-off there, and how will the internet evolve if we have, video at free cost as a whole? So let's talk about another phrase that you have there on your talk that it cost me. Uh, I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun because we track a lot of time at NILG.AI, and I do see this at our client's company, which is a data scientist can waste 64% of their time. So we all have part-time data scientists. What is the main reason behind this statement? What is that data scientists are wasting more than half of their time?
So I've been talking for a while about data scientists, and in fact, you held up my book, Data Teams. I talk about it in Data Teams, and that is the issue that we've all heard: 80 data scientists spend 80% of their time on data engineering tasks. Everybody says it. Lots of data scientists say it. Now the question comes: nobody actually went back and said, "Oh, okay, they're spending 80% of their time. How productive are they at that?" So I've been saying that they're not productive at all. And I've been trying to find a way to really resonate with people about what does this mean? What I reference in the book a Google paper where they're drawing boxes and they show that the box of amount of time for AI and ML is much smaller than the data engineering part. Okay. So we definitely have Google saying that, but I don't think anybody has really put a point on it as well as I think I did of saying this is what it means. It means that you have a part-time data scientist. And that resonates with managers because they're thinking they're just a little bit they're just a little bit unproductive. But if you look at how unproductive they are, so let's say they're 30% or 40% or 80%. So in my experience, most data scientists are between 60 to 80% unproductive or inefficient at data engineering tasks. This is often doesn't sit well with data scientists because they think that they're good at this. Sorry, data scientists, you aren't, frankly. Uh, you know how to code, you don't know how to do software engineering. That's just the blunt part of it. You don't know how to do data engineering. So the issue there is if these data scientists are spending 80% of their time on these tasks and they're 80% inefficient at that, that means that you don't even have a half-time person, you actually have a third-time person. And that's where we get into this thing that will resonate with management to say, oh, okay, this is why our data science teams are so unproductive. So you have these really expensive people doing something that they're incredibly inefficient at. So let's say you're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm not 80%, I'm 60%. Okay, you're at halftime. You're a part-time employee at this point. So this kind of puts a full circle into what I'm worried about for us as as an industry is relative to the spend, relative to what we're doing, we're actually really inefficient and we don't generate very much ROI. So I've spent a lot of time researching this and trying to get the word out, trying to help people understand this. And this is one of the key reasons. You asked me before about why most data projects fail. It's because of this. It's because it takes so long and it takes a far longer because although I'm talking about them being half time or a third time, what that means is that Gantt chart that you had that says we're going to end in 8 weeks or 3 months or whatever now takes you 6 months. So you've doubled that. You've doubled how long it takes. And that's when management says, "Oh, we're going to cut the cord on this." There's all kinds of other manifestations to this. The amount of cost. Your project now cost twice as much to do just in the labor, but I would say more importantly in the opportunity cost. So now that what you thought was going to generate revenue in 6 months now takes 12 months to do, or to generate revenue. There's a lot of manifestations to this, and each one of them is bad.
Do you think so? Let's say, and I think I know the answer, but let's say you could have a team with two data scientists and eight data engineers, right? That will resemble the 20-80% distribution of tasks. Do you think that team will be close to 100% efficient, discounted by communication? Or do you think our tasks are so ambiguous that even the communication part will still make it a part time team of 10 people?
You're missing a key metric there, and that is the experience of the team. This is probably the first time I've talked about it publicly, and that is a new thinking I'm having is that I will always take a smaller, more senior team above a bunch of beginners or even intermediates.
Yeah.
So if you were to pose that same question to me with, let's say we have a team of 10 intermediates and I will give you two, three, four, let's call it four good, solid, experienced senior people, I will take that.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is what you alluded to, that as we look at the communication, the amount of communication that a four-person team needs to have versus a 10-person team, we all know that it expands exponentially. But I don't think it's so much a communication issue as I think it's an experience issue. And the experience issue is this, that data engineering, data science is just plain hard. So the amount of efficacy or productivity that a senior person have, a truly senior person has, versus an intermediate person is not a 2x. I think it's much more of a 4, 6, 8x, where if you look at all said and done, having even paying those people more, having to pay them more, I think you will come out far ahead, much further ahead, with a much more competent, smaller team than a much bigger beginner
Yeah,
team.
yeah, that's for sure. And I think one big issue with startups and with, especially in Portugal, I believe that's the case, is that we take too long to hire a senior person because of the inherent cost we pay upfront, and not because of the value they will generate in the end. And for sure, I mean, even I will say, even more importantly, on jobs that require critical thinking, that are like information jobs, like jobs regarding experience and thinking more than manual labor. I believe that could happen also with manual labor, but senior people will always beat a large team of rookies. um, and do you know if this like if this effect is also happens in other careers? For example, do we have part-time doctors because they have to fill in medical reports, or part-time lawyers because they have to do all of this due diligence, and a senior lawyer will beat a team of young lawyers? Have you studied
Oh
other
yeah.
areas?
Have you seen the meme video where it's the Japanese players, the three, I think I don't know if they're pro players, but they're at least adults versus 100 children. Have you seen that video?
No, no.
Okay, I'll describe it then. So there's this video, you can probably search it, and you always see it on LinkedIn because it's a very good analogy of this is what can three good people do versus 100 people who know not what they're doing. So it's 100 children playing football, soccer, depending on where you're from. So for the Americans out there, soccer; for the rest of the world, football. Playing football. And so what the pro players do is that they pass it to each other. And so they're able to evade the 100 children because they'll kick it to one side, one will go over there, kick it to the other, and they're just bypassing all these children. And so, yes, this is exactly what happens. I see this in my consulting, quite frankly, of a 20-person beginner team is those group of children. To your question, do we see this in other fields? I think we see this in knowledge work where there's where there's a huge barrier to entry or a lot of time that it takes to build up the knowledge to do this versus, let's say, a manufacturing. I don't know if you ever consulted at a manufacturing company, they're the worst to deal with because they have this manufacturing mindset of you are a cog on my manufacturing line and I'm going to replace you, and that person I replace you with will be able to be trained in a day, and cog A will then hand off to cog B, which hands off to cog C, and you're completely replaceable, you're cheap. I don't see why I should do that. So we see this anti-pattern and this pattern of, yeah, we're the back to the LLMs. I don't see why I can't replace you with an LLM. I don't see why I can't replace you on my assembly line. And this knowledge worker is not built like that. And quite honestly, we as an industry do this to ourselves. We have a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, and they somehow have this job, and so they give us a bad name, quite frankly, where they say, look at Juan or whomever, Joao. Look at Joao. Doesn't know anything. Why should I spend twice as much for Felipe, who can do who's a senior person? And it's because Felipe can do twice as much, four times as much than Joao. That's the problem we can't get through.
Yeah. And going back to the analogy of the football soccer, I feel like young data scientists, young programmers, like are all deluded, like are all delusional about this ball, and they go like it's like a external stimuli that they get obsessed with the ball and they go all to chase the ball even before thinking what should be the next move. You know, whether whether a senior person knows how to handle the ball and whether or not it makes sense to go behind a ball, like go catch a ball, yes or no. With junior people, it's especially with junior programmers, data scientists, they get too fast into solving a technical problem that maybe it's not that relevant. It's not that important at all. So we are talking a
There's
lot
another
about
talk
data.
where I actually talked about that, and I called it overgeneralization. And what overgeneralization means, or generalization means, is that given a pattern, I'm going to apply that same pattern in every situation. Whether that be a technical pattern, a design pattern, a technology, there's this overgeneralization. And what we see that is exactly the situation you're talking about is new people will take a pattern du jour, the pattern of the day, and we'll say, okay, everything has to be a microservice. Everything is a microservice pattern. When they don't have the senior ability to say, well, maybe it should be a monolith, or maybe a microservice pattern makes absolutely no sense in this case. So there's this inability, or Kafka. Kafka is another good one. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Kafka in places where it doesn't belong. An RPC, a remote procedure call, a synchronous RPC would have been significantly better. Or then they'll take this other thing, they'll do CQRS and make that pattern with Kafka even more. So CQRS, command query response system, it's just overkill for the vast majority of things, but they'll apply this, they'll make that overgeneralization. And as you look back as a business, this overgeneralization doesn't just cause a problem where for that project, kind of going back as a thematically, when we try to go undo what a data scientist did, what a junior person who overgeneralized did, it doesn't take the same amount of time. So if it took that junior person, let's say 2 months or 3 months to do that project, to undo that project will take usually 2 or 3x that. So as a business, you could think of this as technical debt. That junior person is creating so much technical debt for you that it's going to take a senior person twice as long, 3 times as long to undo that. And so we're constantly digging ourselves this hole with our junior people.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And then getting into not generalization but the specialization, you talk about data scientists, data engineers, and operations, right? Then we have data analysts as more of a consumer, let's say, of this data. I have been thinking a lot on yes, these are technical people, but what is the right profile to translate the business needs into technical and to serve like a translator between the two tribes, between the two communities? Have you find any good profile that understands a lot by, like, I mean, with a good baseline on business and management and a good baseline on technical requirements and technical specifications, so they can play the moderator, the intermediate, the role between the two.
This is if as people are watching, I actually talk about this in more depth in my talk at Data Day Texas last year or this year, excuse me, where I actually said at the end of my talk, I said, talk to the business. So directly to your question of who should it be, it should be you being the person who's writing the code. The more intermediaries we have, the further away we are from the business problem, the less likely we're going to actually hit that.
Yeah.
So directly to your question of who should that intermediary be, I don't believe there should be an intermediary. So that brings up the question of who should or how do you take a person who's a data engineer, who's a data scientist, and get them to talk to the business? Well, I bring this up because in the Agile Manifesto, this was always there. It was always in the Agile Manifesto that we talked to our end customer. Not that our manager talks to them or not that the project manager talks to them. We talk to them. And the reason that we talk to them is exactly kind of what you alluded to. Somebody needs to be there who's technical enough to say, no, that's stupid. Or no, they may not say, say it nicer than that, but sometimes business will say, I need AI for this. Well, maybe a gradient, a simple gradient descent will do. Or maybe even just a simple calculation will do.
Yeah.
Maybe they've just went to a conference and they've been loaded up with everything should be LLMs, and they need somebody in the room who's technical enough to say, no, that's stupid. And you don't need that. Here's what we need. Or maybe they're right. Or maybe the solution that they propose, they say, do it this way, and you say LLM. In fact, I'm experiencing that right now. I've got a person who's saying, I want to do this rules-based system. I'm saying, no, no, no. We can actually do a significantly better job with an LLM. And by being a technical person in the room directly interfacing with the client, we're able to say, here is why it's better to use an LLM in this case, because it will handle all the errors better. We'll actually have a higher success rate and that sort of thing versus this rules-based way. We'll have a smaller code base. It will be more maintainable. There's a lot of benefits to this, but what you have to be doing is you have to be there talking directly to the customer, directly to the business. And what they may come back and say, for example, this customer is saying, well, but the cost, will the cost be higher? Will this be higher? What will that change? And I think that overall, this project will be cheaper and better because we would use an LLM versus a rules based system. Because
Yeah.
a rules based system, you'll constantly be having to make another if else statement, another if else statement as you find these edge cases
Yeah.
all the way through. So,
Yeah.
to kind of sum it up, everybody who's watching this, your ICs, your individual contributors need to be talking to the business. And maybe they're not ready yet. Maybe you as a manager need to be in that room to show this, but we don't model this behavior enough. And so people may not be ready yet, but you have to model this behavior and you have to teach it.
Yeah. I kind of agree and disagree at the same time. And I will fully agree with you if we add a condition, which is you need a senior technical person talking with the management team. Why? Because managing projects, it's more about managing humans than about managing tasks or requirements, right? So it's more about managing expectations. It's about managing human nature. And in general, as we become more senior, we are better at managing, at understanding human nature and how will people react if I put this deadline or this cost, or what is the impact of this on the business. So I do think technical people will do a better job at translating business needs into technical terms, as long as they are senior enough to understand human nature. That would be my only. Yeah.
Well, when I think of a team, and that's probably maybe a difference. I don't think of a data team as being junior. I don't think that you can have a junior data team. So maybe that's kind of an assumption I'm making.
Yeah, exactly. So the main person guiding it has to be as the senior person, and not because otherwise it creates a lot of noise in the discussion, and it will be like this ball on the football in the football field where all the junior peoples are getting, you know, uh, are getting excited about the ball moving here and there and reacting to every type of shiny object instead of, focusing on human nature. Is this what actually moves the organization, or is this more something like they just throw up just to see what's going on? So another follow-up question around this, which is, when do you think, and I guess I know your answer, but when do you think we should bring data people to projects? Because a mistake I see a lot happening is like management decides the entire project, what is going to be, what is going to decide, what is going to optimize as a whole, and then they bring the technical people to solve it. So what do you know, what will be the impact of putting data people in the discovery phase of the process?
The impact will be that they'll be far better off. And some of this I think is historical in nature, where if a company's old enough, they would have had a data warehouse team, and they often wouldn't bring the data warehouse team into those discussions because they would hear no. They would be told, no, this isn't possible, no, we can't do this, and they would just hear that over and over in that sort of meeting. And I think this is the difference between what a data team is. A data team, as I describe it, is that they're not being told no, they're being told, this is how we can do this, this is how we can accomplish this. And I think that is a very big difference and big change there. So early on, what I do in my consulting is I have a meeting where we have both the technical people in the room and the management people in the room, and I guide that meeting, and I mediate that meeting and run that meeting. And I have both people in that room because although I have a great deal of experience in data, I don't know everything about their technical side, but I can make some pretty good suppositions. Likewise, you have management in the room and the business in the room because we need to figure out what this does. But I think without the technical people in the room, they feel dictated to. Where the meetings that I run, they feel like they have an agreement, and that's very different in terms of productivity and buy-in. Everybody calls it buy-in, but I think that translates to productivity. Was I told to do this and I didn't have a say, and they're telling me something stupid? Or did I have a say in it? I got to say, no, let's do it this way, and we all bought in and we all agreed. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah. What about, so here we are talking on when we introduce the team, and now we are also talking about the existence of a team as like there is a data team. But as organizations become larger and larger and larger, a pattern that I have seen is that small data teams start appearing on different business units, on different departments, and then they try to like merge those teams into a centralized unit. But then after 2 3 years, you see them again having decentralized micro data teams on the CRM department, on their marketing department, on their operations department, on their, I mean, like there's there is this conflict on large organizations between centralized and decentralized teams. What do you think is the best approach around this?
So I've seen that too, and I talk about that in data teams. And the issue I don't think is the issue is that they're dealing with something fundamental or foundational. Instead of going at the problem, they're going after manifestations. Oh, we have this problem that we should bring everybody together. Oh, we're having this problem, let's split everybody up. Instead of saying, why did the business feel the need to hire their own? It's because you weren't executing. It's because they had needs and they were saying, please do this. Can you please do this? And it never gets done. And then they think, okay, the only way I'm going to get this done is by having my own. I've seen it too many times. It is exactly what happens. The sponsor of that says, I have the budget, I have the mandate, and I have to get this done. So I'm going to go hire somebody to go do it. And then on the other side, you have, well, why did they feel the need to centralize them? It's because there's no consistency. It's because everybody's doing their own thing. The frameworks they're using, the technologies they're using are all over the place. These are the problems. So what you have is you have all these kind of duct tape kind of problems, but you never attack the foundational problems of why did the business say that they weren't productive, and why do you have such a smorgasbord, such a big problem? And you have to solve those a different way. You can't just say bring everybody, put everybody together, put them in different places. No, that's not going to solve it. You have to
Okay.
solve productivity. You have to solve which technologies. How do we choose technologies? Do we have a data team? So I think foundationally, this comes back to the thought of a data product. We haven't talked about this yet, but data products are what we should be focused on and thinking about and saying, what is the best way to create this data product? Is the best way to create a data product as a centralized team, or is the best way uh, as a distributed team? So in the book, generally what I see the best way to do is, if you're a brand new company and you're trying to start, or if you're experiencing problems, I think you should centralize everybody. You centralize everybody so that you can get homogeneous or the sameness throughout the team, consistent processes, consistent technologies, and I would say more importantly, consistent skill sets. Uh, One of the big problems is that the business teams will hire a data engineer who is a DBA, who is a data warehouse person, and they don't know what they're doing. You get this problem. And then they come back to the central data team, and they don't fit in because they don't have the skills. So you have this wild skill level difference of DBAs, data warehouses, and then you have data engineers writing code, and that the two do not match up. So then they come back together, and you have this problem of what do you do with your DBAs? So what you need to do is you need to initially have them all together, create consistent processes, consistent infrastructure, data platforms, start creating those data products, and then perhaps you split out. Perhaps you have a core team and split out. There's a few different possibilities, but I think it all starts with making sure that you have the right foundation.
Okay, so start aligning everybody, and if you are starting today, you will start centralizing everything, and then as you need, once you consolidate your practice, let's say your data practice, you can start, let's say, specializing teams on specific business units, on specific business departments. What's your
And
advice?
domains, yeah,
Yeah.
or
What's
on
your
data products.
Okay. What's your advice for those companies that made the, let's say, the mistake of decentralizing too soon, and now they have a lot of entropy?
To centralize once more. It's and more importantly, I would say not just centralize them, but have a centralized management figure. So sometimes they'll do this dotted line thing. So they're a dotted line from the business unit back to there, but they're still being paid, and it creates a lot of problems of who's my boss, who's in charge. So if
Who is paying the bill of a project?
who's
That
paying
is
the
an issue I
bill,
have seen. Yeah.
and more importantly for that business unit, now they have who's going to actually pay attention to my product while there's this chaos, and that can be a whole problem. So what I would tell people in those situations, usually it's banks, usually it's bigger companies that are in this situation, that they need good strong management with a proven track record on this, who's done it before. uh, Sometimes banks will try to find the cheapest person, somebody who might have some tangential experience. No, you need a good,
Yeah.
strong CDO, CDAO, so Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Chief Data Officer, with a specific mandate, and I would say more importantly, power to be able to bring those people together, create the right management structure, and I would say, and the cover. So there's going to be a lot of fires burning here. More than likely, the person who's being brought in is being brought in because there's a lot of fires in each one of these. So you're going to have to fix the problems while they're on fire. And there's two ways to think about this. If a plane's in a tailspin going down, it's really, really difficult to pull it up and pull it out of a tailspin like that. I've done that
Yeah.
with companies. It is very, very difficult. The other way is the other meme. If you've ever seen it, it's this in India. There was this video of the three-wheeled cars, tuk tuks.
Yeah,
If you've ever heard of them, so
yeah,
there's this tuk tuk, and so they he does this thing where he swings it up so that it's on two wheels, and they change the third wheel while they're still driving. This is basically what that person's going to have to do. And this person, this chief, this management, the CDO, is going to have to fix a lot of problems while you're driving, and it takes a pretty difficult touch to do that. Quite frankly, having done
yeah,
it, I can say that it's very, very difficult to do. So if a lot of times what will happen is companies will find a person who can talk well, uh, but doesn't really gain or doesn't have the experience and can't get everybody working together. It's
yeah.
a very, very difficult situation.
I see that the problem there is again managing human nature, because this person will need to decide who to pay attention to at each point. I mean, who to say no, right? Because if it is centralized, the resource becomes more scarce, and access to that resource becomes more scarce. And so that person will need to decide who are they going to say yes in terms of which use cases they will tackle on this quarter or whatever, and who is going to say no. And if this person doesn't properly manage expectations of when I'm having my chunk of the data team and when I'm getting my results, then it will decentralize again by nature, right? Because the individual departments will start hiring new teams. So although I'm a big fan of decentralization on everything, I do see the value of centralization on data, especially on early stages, or for companies that do not have a solid foundation, a solid, let's say, way of doing things around data. But that person will be living on fire for a few years until they consolidate governance,
Yeah,
management, and
yeah,
resources.
and you eventually will get those teams out back again, but
Exactly.
it's I don't believe it's possible to do it well while you're not their direct manager, unless you have hiring and firing power. I don't think you could do it.
Yeah. What about times? I think we already answered this regarding seniority, but what about team size versus company maturity? So, is there any correlation between large companies should have larger data teams, or is it more of how much they have embraced AI, and how many resources they will need? Have you seen any pattern there?
There isn't a pattern or there isn't a golden rule for size. There's a general golden rule for ratio, but not for size. So that ratio we've alluded to it, but let's talk specifically and say that ratio is 2 to 5 data engineers per data scientist. So at the majority of companies, it's inverted, where there are far more data scientists to data engineers. It should be the other way. It should be far more data engineers to data scientists because the more work is being done on the data engineering side than the data
Yeah,
science side.
I guess the 80%
And
80% of data engineering tasks per data scientist match that 1 to 5 ratio of data science to data engineer.
exactly. So that's where that ratio comes in. So if you're trying to figure out a team size, one of the examples I talked about at DSPA was there was a company I heard about here in Portugal who was saying we need to hire more data scientists. Uh, but even without knowing much about the team, I could tell what they needed to hire was a data engineer or data engineers. They didn't need more data scientists, and an issue. So if I were doing consulting with a company and that company were to say, take a look at our team, what do you think? And more than likely it would be saying, expand out your data engineering. Your data engineering side is very weak, and that will help out in turn make your data scientists more productive and probably do this and this and this. But as far as sizes, usually it's much more I'm looking at ratio and productivity
Yeah,
rather
makes
than
sense.
overall size.
Makes sense. Have you seen the skill set or this or the role distribution changing after generative AI?
I haven't seen any change there yet. One of the debates I saw Joe Reese talk about this, and I shared this as well at DSPA, and that is You have two possible motifs or modes of what generative AI is going to do for in the coding space. It it's going to make your junior people a little bit more productive, but I think it's going to make your senior people far more productive. And you've heard this is kind of a theme of your. I think that a senior person isn't just twice as productive, three times as productive. So likewise, their a senior person's usage of generative AI for code generation will be much higher. That they'll be able to understand and choose and figure out when generative AI is helpful in that situation. So that will be that's going to be the biggest change, I think. So will companies want fewer people to be higher, more productive, or will they try to be cheaper and have their cheaper people and say, oh, we don't need our senior people anymore. We can show them the door. I hope they don't do that because I think that generative AI is going to, so I can speak from firsthand experience on this. I'm doing lots of projects with generative AI, using it for code generation, and it's not going for the things it does well, it does really well. But when it falls off, it completely falls off.
Yeah.
So there's a problem I'm going through right now. Generative AI is completely useless at this, and who knows? Maybe it was caused by generative AI.
Yeah.
But anyway, it is a person who knows a lot about the problem to go fix it. I've hit this several times in this project of there's a thing that only I would only know because I've done this for a long time to be able to say, oh, that's the problem, and then you can type it into Chat GPT and say, do this. Or I'm using Cursor, the IDE, if you're familiar with it, where you can hit Command K or Control K and type in do this or write this line of code. But that ability to type in that line of code and know what that line of code is isn't Chat GPT told me that was the problem. It was after a lot of
Exactly.
experience and figuring out the problem, then I realized that's the problem, the
Exactly.
fix. The fix is one line of code. To figure out that one line of code takes a while. And that's where I'm worried that companies will try to say, oh, Chat GPT, you can do all this, you can find all these bugs. I don't think that's going to be the case. To paraphrase before, I will take a smaller senior team with AI, generative AI, over a much bigger junior team.
Yeah. What about internal versus external teams? Do you think that bringing external people creates value somehow? Like,
It does, especially if the company's core competency is not coding or data
okay.
science. So the key there is if you're a company and you're watching this and you're in manufacturing and you look around and you say, we have maybe one or two technical people, one's a DBA, one's a let's say a BI person, you don't have the core competency to embark on a big AI or a data project or a big data project or LLM project. You are so much better off hiring that out. That is not your core competency. But if your core competency, if you're very into coding and you have a large software development team, then you can look at that and you could say, you can make a much more educated guess of, okay, do we have anybody who understands? Let's say they were doing something in we want to create our own foundational model. Probably not your core competency there. You should hire that out. That is going to, they're going to know better. They're going to be faster. There's going to be some benefits there. You also have the other sort of modality of we hire. It's a body shop where the company will have a very small number of people that are full time employees. This is more common in Europe where there'll be two or three people that are employees of that company and the rest are contractors. That can be interesting because maybe you bring that company on. Maybe that company will help you be more productive. But the question for me is, will you stifle them with either process or not allowing them to use generative AI?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions there.
Yeah. Yes, of course. And I will say that even if you have a core competence in data, and this comes into data or into any other field, there is some value on bringing diversity of ideas. So talking with external people, I think it's always at least to brainstorm alternative paths, and that's why I think like these communities like the SPA are relevant, uh, because you are able to share ideas with people facing different kind of issues.
Yeah, one of the things I would say there is it's a fallacy or it's foolhardy to think that you know everything about data.
Yeah,
Data will teach you the other way. So frameworks, Kafka's changing all the time, Flink is changing all the time. So unless you've have really specialized in, let's say, Flink or in Kafka or in real-time systems like I have, and you're talking to somebody who mostly knows batch systems, they're not going to be able to answer certain questions. They're not going to be able to talk about the difference of what are
yeah,
the fundamental issues with transactions in Kafka, for
yeah,
example. And that's where, to your point, you can get some good value out of that. Let's say maybe they're not hitting the keys for you, maybe they're doing the architecture review for you, but that's actually really key. You can save. Here's another concept I teach, or I when I consult, and that is: Do you know what the cheapest way to deal with a mistake? It's when it's up on a whiteboard and you can erase it and you can change it. That is the
yeah,
cheapest way to resolve a mistake right there. And if you don't have that person in the room who can't point to that and say, no, that's a mistake, you will make that mistake, you will implement that mistake, and undoing that mistake won't take
we'll tell you.
a few
Yeah,
seconds. It's going to take months.
yeah, yeah, or it will be never solved, and then you will just have a patch on top of it. um One question here. So you are the manager of the Big Data Institute, and I want to poke you a bit around this. Do you think the future is more data or less data for AI? So are we going into Big Data Institute, or should we pivot in a few years into small data institutes because of all of these foundational models?
I don't think the foundational models are going to change us in terms of amounts of data. But the
Okay.
amounts of data have always been either large or big, depending on the size of the company, depending on the size. So if you're going to create a foundational model, guess what? You're going to need a distributed system. You're going to
Yeah,
need a
of course.
pretty massive distributed system.
But the number of
You're
companies
going
that will
to
build foundational models will be small, and the number of companies that will use these models will be all of them, basically, potentially.
Well, that was the point I was about to make. Is I've done projects using models, both foundational, so Llama, as well as GPT. And if you start using those at any scale, you need to use distributed systems once more. So although
Okay.
you say big data, I would say big data, distributed systems, that sort of thing. So if you're going to use a lot of these models and at any scale, you can't just put it you can't just type it into ChatGPT, and you can't just run it in a spreadsheet. You actually now need a distributed system because it takes a while for each one of these models to return a response. So
Yeah.
if you're going to do this for 100,000, so I did a project where it was on 100,000 different conversations. Actually, it was more than 100,000 conversation. If you're going to put those conversations through an LLM, you can't do that with just even Python, single threaded Python. It's going to take forever. You have to use distributed systems in order to do that efficiently. So perhaps to your question is, are we going to have to continue to have large amounts of data? Are we going to have to continue to use distributed systems? Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Where maybe we're doing this in real time and we do real time processing with LLMs, you're going to need distributed systems for that. If you're going
Yeah.
to process large amounts of data with LLMs, you're going to need distributed systems for that too.
Yeah.
And as new models come out, you're probably going to have to redo that
Yeah.
because it will be that much better. So yes,
Yeah.
I think we will. Uh, Now the corollary people have said is that machines are so fast now that you don't need a bunch of machines or what have you.
Yeah.
I still disagree with that. But it depends.
You will
Uh,
start tackling problems
uh,
at a different scale in any case.
the thing I would tell people, and it's one I've told them forever, even before LLMs, is hey, if you figure out that you don't need big data or distributed systems, you know what? You have saved yourself so much time and heartache. You are so much better off. Don't use them. Don't over engineer.
Yeah,
Don't say I need Spark. Don't say I need Kafka because of XYZ. Don't over engineer that, because it isn't just a little bit of over engineering. You're now into distributed systems, and these distributed systems are far more difficult to deal with
yeah, and to
otherwise.
manage
So,
and to yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So from your argument, I maybe foresee as a shift on team distribution, getting more into the operation side in the future, as we get more into using AI and less into building AI predictive models, whatever, internally with Gen AI. Maybe it's just a random guess. So if everything is moving into usage of AI, maybe operations will become even more pressing than data science, and I won't say necessarily data engineering, because data engineering and operations are extremely intertwined. So let's just to wrap up here. We've been talking, I'm not sure, for about an hour. I kept saying that I will try to shorten the episodes, but I always get overexcited in between. So let's try to narrow down your, I don't know how many years of experience, into the three best practices and the three worst practices you have seen when managing data teams.
So the reference you're making is to the some of the studies and surveys that I've done. I'm doing one now if people want to fill it out or see the results of it.
Share the
And
link, and I
but
will put it on the description
yeah,
of the YouTube video.
yeah. So that is that's not just me seeing them within my or I'll put it a different way. I know that although have consulted with a lot of companies, I'm still one person. I want to see everybody's experience and I want to see aggregate results. So that's part of why I do that research and that survey, is to say, okay, here's what I've seen. What are other people seeing? Are you seeing this too? And so the worst practices and the best practices kind of come out of that. And I talk about them in the book as well as in the survey. So take a look at the survey. Anyway, those worst and best practices will vary based on the maturity as well. So the maturity of a company, they'll have this problem, and low maturity early on, they'll have another problem. But the worst practices are having only data scientists. We see it less, but we still see it, and that is having your DBAs and data warehouse people be data engineers that they have no background in data science, or excuse me, in distributed systems or coding, and here we are putting them and saying, go write this complex code. The third one I would say is no management buy-in, that the management has not truly bought in or has not really understood what a data project means. It means expensive people with expensive hardware and expensive clouds. And trying to do this on a shoestring just doesn't work well. Best practices are having a management framework and sticking to it. I would also say it's getting help early on. You've heard me talk about a lot of different problems. One of the points I'd like to make is that these problems don't right themselves on their own. You probably heard the saying that time heals all wounds. That isn't the case with these data projects. And I know this because I'll follow up with companies where they had this problem in year one. I talked to them in year three, same problem. Maybe some different manifestations, but same foundational problem. So get some help. That help could be various ways: consulting, architecture reviews, lots of things, as you mentioned, having people come in and do it for you, all the way to that. The other best practice is, I would say, continuing education of the team. Things are changing. Don't just send your people to a vendor webinar and expect them to hear best practices, because guess what? They're going to hear just what that vendor wants you to know. So that vendor probably not going to tell you, here's the ways in which our product sucks. They're going to tell you, use their product no matter what, and that's going to be a problem for you.
Makes sense. And I would like to add one, which is I believe there is a lack of data culture in management, especially in small companies and SMEs, let's say, as a whole. So I believe all entrepreneurs and all managers should have a minimum level of data literacy, of of looking at a chart and knowing what's going on with that chart, knowing what is the level of noise. So and a lot of times, this part of the management buying in is how I believe is how comfortable they are with data, not necessarily with managing data, but with understanding what data has to say. So let's wrap up with three book recommendations, Jesse, that you have. They can be data books, books about data, or books about anything else.
Let's see. I have one behind. I have some behind me, and so I would recommend people read Data Mesh.
Okay,
It'd be too self-serving to say read my book, but
of
I
course.
would suggest
Yeah,
my
we have it
book
here.
as it is.
It's a great reference.
Let's see.
I always promote our YouTube channel when people ask me to recommend stuff around AI.
The
So
third
you
book,
you have my back.
it the Pragmatic Programmer. So there's few programming books I've read several times, and there's few books that I've bought several times, programming books. But I've met both. I'm published on Prag, and I've met both Dave and Andy. So Dave Thomas, Andy Hunt, they're the authors of it, and they're genuinely good people, genuinely nice people. Uh, so if you ever get to see a conference that they're speaking at, make an effort, go see Dave and Andy. Super nice people. But I would say more importantly, they wrote a book that stood the test of time. It wasn't about here's this framework. They wrote a book about how you as an engineer get better and how do you do better. And so if you haven't read it, I would highly suggest it because I think it stood the test of time.
I will. I will. I will read it. Thank you. Thank you for the recommendations, and thank you for taking the time. It has been an honor to have you here. I mean, I could do this for a longer time, but I'm pressing myself just to keep episodes shorter. So it has been an honor, and I hope I guess I will see you again on the SPA Insights in September in Lisbon, and I hope to see you all guys there. Thank you, Jesse, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelwin. Thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for watching this. Best of luck.
Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.